Most investors know that we have two kinds of returns on stocks: capital gain and dividends. But not many people know that dividend growth investors have three kinds of returns. The third kind of return is the dividend growth. I mentioned many times that dividend investing is not about buying any stock that pay dividends. We only buy dividend growth stocks. These are companies that grow their dividend payment for at least 10 or 15 years or even decades. Take a look at the dividend history of Coca-Cola. Here you can see that they are growing their dividends from 1986 for 35 years now. This is a typical dividend growth stock. When we invest in these kinds of companies, we have a capital gain, we have dividends, and we have dividend growth. These are the three returns on dividend growth stocks. Just to be clear, I'm not buying this stock. This is just an example. In fact, I made a video about why I don't invest in Coca-Cola. The dividend growth is only one factor in the process of picking stocks. So when you see a dividend history like this, then sure, it's a good start. But it's not enough to decide whether we should invest in this stock or not. Now let's talk about how much money you can earn with dividend growth investing. The average dividend yield of a typical dividend investor is about 4%. This means if we invest $100,000, we get $4,000 in dividends the first year. Now, if you are not familiar with dividend growth stocks, you might think that 4% is not a lot. So why would you invest for a 4% yield? And this is why most people are confused about dividend investing, because they don't know that the 4% dividend yield is only one of the three returns on dividend growth stocks. The other two returns are capital gain and dividend growth. So let's say that a company raises its dividends by 10% every year. This means that they need to grow their revenue by 10% every year. Because of course, dividends can only be paid from revenue, right? They can't print money. This is why revenue is also important. A dividend stock is not a bond. It's not a loan that the company has to pay back. The company is not legally obligated to pay dividends. We only keep getting dividends if the company can and want to pay dividends. So we buy the stock with a 4% dividend yield, but this is our dividend yield only for the first year, because then the company raises their dividend by 10%. So the second year we have a 4.4% dividend yield on our cost. And of course this doesn't seem much, and the stock price does not necessarily follow this growth. But in the second year, the company raises its dividend by 10% again. And because we hold the stock, we have a 4.84% dividend yield after the second year. Now the price of the stock may or may not follow the growth of the dividend, but let's see how our dividend yield grows over the years. So you can see that after 10 years, we have a 10% yearly return only in dividends. And by then, the price of the stock will definitely follow this growth. If the dividend doubles, the stock price will double. So after 10 years, you have a 10% dividend yield on your cost. But since the stock price is following the growth of the dividend over the long term, those who buy the stock 10 years later, they can only buy it at a 4% dividend yield. For example, you buy the stock for $100 and with a 4% dividend yield, and you get $4 the first year. When the dividend will be $8, the stock price will be probably around $200. So you have an 8% dividend yield because you bought the stock for $100, and you will also have 100% capital gain on it. But people who buy the stock for $200, they only have a 4% dividend yield. But 10 years is not a very long time in the world of investing, so let's see our dividend yield for the upcoming years. So when we hold the dividend growth stock, after 20 years our dividend yield will be 26% per year. So if you bought the stock for $100,000, you get $4,000 in dividends the first year. But after 20 years of dividend growth, you get a yearly $26,000 only in dividends on your $100,000 investment. And this doesn't include our capital gain, because you can be sure that if the company can grow their dividends for 20 years, it's not a question that the price of the stock will follow this growth. And we didn't even talk about reinvesting the dividends. If you reinvest the dividends, you buy new stocks from the dividends, your portfolio will grow in an exponential way. So this is the reason why we don't just buy any dividend paying stocks, but we are focusing on only a few hundred companies that are dividend growth companies. And of course, as I always say, this is only one factor in our selection process, and we need to check many other details before we invest in any stock.